House shall rise. The House shall come to order.
Okay, welcome everyone to the St Andrews Union Debating Society, the oldest and some might say finest of its kind.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. The motion that stands before the House this evening reads that this House believes that the Commonwealth is a force for good. I'm delighted to welcome some excellent speakers this evening. On the proposition, we have Professor Kingsley Abbott and Kiwi Manivannan. And on the opposition, we have Professor Thomas Scotto and our very own Arielle Friedlander. Now, just before we begin tonight's debate, I would like to invite the Clerk of the House, Lewis, to read last week's minutes in the style of Bob Catter.
Yeah, people are entitled to their sexual proclivities. Let 1,000 blossoms bloom as far as I'm concerned. But I ain't spending any time on it, because every 3 months a person dies to a crocodile in North Queensland, Australia.
Point. Don't we have enough international students? This is Scotland, not Queensland.
Counterpoint. It's called the Queensland. Why shouldn't we be talking about it?
Well, there seems to be some disagreement in the House. We shall have to take a vote by oral acclamation. All those in favour of taking the minutes as read, say aye.
Aye.
All those against?
Nay.
It seems rather close. I shall have to consult with my sergeant.
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are taken as read.
Resign.
Thank you. Wonderful. So without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker for the proposition, Professor Kingsley Abbott, to begin tonight's debate. Hear, hear.
Good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to stand here before you to argue why we think the Commonwealth is a force for good. And I'd like to begin, I think, by laying out my stall, to be very clear from the very beginning, that I'm an international human rights lawyer, and therefore I'm a pragmatist, and I'm not an idealist. And whilst I was born in a Commonwealth country, Aotearoa, New Zealand, I do not harbour any romantic or misty-eyed nostalgia about the Commonwealth. I have only one interest in the Commonwealth, which is how can we use a voluntary organisation of 56 member countries to improve the lives of people around the world. And really my defence of the Commonwealth, or my argument as to why it is a force for good, is really just a defence of multilateralism. Multilateralism is something that I very strongly believe in. And I think as we stand here in 2025, we are witnessing ever-increasing hostility towards it. The world is facing an array of shared, complex, and interconnected challenges, while at the same time, populism, isolationism, and nationalism are on the rise. In other words, as the need for more multilateralism presents itself, we are watching it weaken and diminish. And in my view, any grouping of states coming together to seek solutions to shared challenges is inherently a force for good. But let me be more concrete. I will refer to 5 areas where I think in 2025, and I emphasise that, in 2025, the Commonwealth is unquestionably a force for good. The first is supporting education, the second is amplifying the voices of small states, the third is creating a trade advantage, the fourth is promoting human rights, democracy and the rule of law, and the fifth is as a forum for multilateralism. The Commonwealth is a force for good for promoting education. At the relaunch of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at the University of London, where I'm the director, just last year, one of the speakers was one of our senior fellows, Dr. Farah Faisal, who's the former High Commissioner for the Maldives. And she said on the stage, when small island states and smaller Commonwealth countries think of the Commonwealth, they think of education. Which led me to wonder, what is the contribution of the Commonwealth towards education? One way to measure it is to say, well, the Association of Commonwealth Universities has a network of more than 400 universities in more than 40 countries, and they've been bringing universities together for over 100 years. Another is the British Council of Commonwealth Scholarships. Each year, around 700 students from around the world are given the chance to undertake postgraduate degrees at UK universities. And I was impressed to learn that since 1960, over 31,000 scholarships have been offered. And many of those people have gone on to take up significant positions and leadership roles around the world in global governance and in other spaces. And we also take on Commonwealth scholarships ourselves at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. And in December, I had a wonderful hour sitting talking to some of our distance learning scholars from around the world in places such as Malawi and India, people working on human rights, women's access to justice, a very impressive woman in India working on the tension between conservation and human rights. And these are all people who are benefiting from these scholarships that are offered by the Commonwealth. And through initiatives like this, frankly, the Commonwealth has provided life-changing opportunities for thousands of students. The Commonwealth is a force for good by amplifying the voices and the perspectives and the interests of smaller countries. Did you know that 33 countries of the Commonwealth's 56 member states, nearly 60% are small states, and 25 of them are small island developing states, known as SIDS. And these states face a number of particularly unique challenges. For example, SIDS are considered extremely vulnerable to climate change, even though they contribute minimally to global greenhouse gas emissions. And they are particularly susceptible due to their geographic characteristics. They also, in many cases, have limited capacity to adapt. And arguably, the Commonwealth has been amongst the loudest advocates for these states, pushing for climate financing and international commitments to reduce carbon emissions. It has also established programs to help vulnerable nations build resilience against national disasters. One example is the Commonwealth Blue Charter, which was agreed to by all 56 Commonwealth countries at the 2018 CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. I think also one of the things that the Commonwealth really offers is to give these states greater visibility. And I saw that firsthand myself when I was fortunate to be invited to the last Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa. So we flew out from London to Samoa just in October, and it was wonderful for me as a New Zealander because a lot of the Samoans had Kiwi accents, and it was like coming home. It was like being back in amongst the family. And it was a special experience to see all these pasty-looking Brits getting off the plane, landing in Samoa, and being given tours of what it really means for a country to be affected by climate change, and to have people from India, and to have people from Uganda. Friends of mine were there from Malawi, from Barbados. Everybody came to Samoa to see Samoa up close and to have conversations about what matters to that country. And that's a platform provided by the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is a force for good by providing an advantage in trade. It is said that it is approximately 19% cheaper to trade within the Commonwealth. And that's because Commonwealth countries have in common the English language, the common law, common financial systems, and this is often referred to as the Commonwealth advantage. And at the last CHOGM, the Secretary-General announced that inter-Commonwealth trade is expected to reach $1 trillion by 2026, $2 trillion by 2030, and intra-Commonwealth investment has tripled since 2016. The Commonwealth is a force for good by promoting human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. But let's be candid for a moment. Let's be frank. There is no doubt that one of the persistent criticisms of the Commonwealth is that while it produces a lot of, some may argue in quotes, platitudes about human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and a lot of paper and a lot of commitments, the reality is that some of its member countries are not adhering to their obligations under international human rights law and standards. The reality may tell a different story. And here we are talking about respect for democracy, to respect for LGBTI plus rights, freedom of expression, and these criticisms are warranted. Is the Commonwealth Charter, which recognises these shared values in 2013, imperfect? Yes. was the fact that it was signed in the same year that the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting was held in Sri Lanka in 2013, at a time when Human Rights said in their annual report that the Sri Lankan government in 2012 continued its assault on democratic space and failed to take any meaningful steps towards providing accountability for war crimes and so on? Yes. Is the Charter useless? No. For example, I like that Article 2 refers to the fact that we are committed to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other relevant human rights covenants and international instruments. In other words, commitment to the binding international human rights legal framework that exists outside of the Commonwealth framework. Article 16 is also very progressive in that it recognises the importance of the role of civil society. And like the UN Charter, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the fact that any of this exists at all, particularly in 2025, is something of a miracle. Is it all nonsense because Commonwealth states have poor records? No. Some of those poor records, I think, are justified, but really those of us who work on human rights and strengthening the rule of law and the promotion of democracy know that it is a long-term effort, and we owe it to people throughout the world, throughout the Commonwealth, including the most vulnerable and marginalised communities, to continue to push for recognition of these rights in whichever forum we find ourselves, including within the Commonwealth, because without them we are all at sea. The Commonwealth is a force for good by embodying that inherent good multinationalism, which is the acknowledgement that states can't solve global challenges on their own and they can better serve their societies by working together with others. It represents a commitment to collective problem solving, shared responsibility, the rules-based order, sustainable development and peaceful conflict resolution. And commitment to multilateralism and multilateral consultation is the lifeblood of the Commonwealth. Indeed, it is one of the Commonwealth's strengths that it is an informal organisation that brings people together to solve problems often quite informally. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank Professor Abbott for that fine address, and now cross and give the floor to Professor Scotto.
Thank you very much. Thank you, my honourable friend who argued in favour of the Commonwealth. Well, before I begin, I promise I'll set aside my personal bitterness towards the Commonwealth for not letting me swap my US driver's license for a UK one, unlike my lucky Canadian friends. But it's these sort of symbolic gestures that we see that really have not much of an impact. This weak multilateral organization in the era of realpolitik, the Commonwealth, basically, let's look at the real issues. Proponents may paint a rosy picture of shared values, economic cooperation, and historical ties. The reality is far more one of post-colonial nostalgia. The Commonwealth represents really what we haven't discussed. Who's the head of the Commonwealth? That would be the United Kingdom, the nominal head. The last gasp of a former great power to remain relevant, when in reality it's been on a long-term downward economic and power spiral since the end of World War II. To improve its standing and increase its relevance, Britain wisely sought to play a leading role in Europe via its ascension into the European Economic Community in the 1970s. As my former colleague at Essex, David Sanders, aptly put it, losing an empire, finding a role. But alas, Britain mismanaged this too, culminating in its exit from the European Union. Now it again looks to the glory of its former past in the Commonwealth. Sadly, the rest of the world has moved on. Basically, what we have here is, unlike the European Union or the United Nations, the Commonwealth has no real authority to enact policies or enforce standards. It operates as a symbolic organization with little to no substantive impact. As my friend has basically admitted, it claims to promote democracy and human rights. Member states such as Uganda and Cameroon have committed significant human rights violations without any meaningful intervention from the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth lacks mechanisms to hold its members accountable, making its advocacy for democracy little more than empty rhetoric. In a world of realpolitik, or realpolitik, depending on how you want to pronounce it, might makes right. And Britain, with its military now smaller than the number of officers of the New York City Police Department, has little to offer Commonwealth countries. Furthermore, as we see with the crisis in Ukraine, Britain's immediate foreign policy interests lie with closer ties to Europe, not with its Commonwealth periphery. The strategic priorities in the modern world, security, trade, and geopolitical influence, are not being advanced through the Commonwealth, but through other alliances and partnerships. Economic disparities in trade and effectiveness. Advocates such as my good friend argue that the Commonwealth facilitates economic cooperation, yet Commonwealth trade is both unbalanced and ineffective. The much touted Commonwealth advantage, the claim that members trade more effectively due to shared language and legal systems, is vastly overstated. Even though Britain scored an own goal by leaving the European Union, its trade remains overwhelmingly tied to Europe, not its former colonial possessions. The supposed economic ties within the Commonwealth are more myth than reality. Unlike the Eurozone, which fosters economic integration through a shared currency, the Commonwealth lacks any form of cohesive economic system. After all, the overseas sterling area no longer exists, and this removes any financial incentive for closer economic relations. Without a common economic framework, the Commonwealth fails to function as a meaningful economic bloc, further undermining claims that it is a force for good. Next, failure to address global challenges. The world faces significant challenges: climate change, global health crises, and rising authoritarianism. Yet when it comes to these pressing issues, the Commonwealth's response has been weak and inconsistent. Small nations in the Pacific and the Caribbean, which are among the most vulnerable to climate change, receive little substantial support from the Commonwealth beyond token gestures and vague statements. If the organization was truly a force for good, it would be leading in this area, not offering empty platitudes. For many member states, Commonwealth membership is more about diplomatic convenience than genuine commitment. The reality is that countries remain in the Commonwealth because it costs little and provides occasional networking opportunities, not because they derive significant benefits. When nations such as Zimbabwe leave, they rarely suffer tangible consequences. In fact, many former colonies that never joined or left the Commonwealth, such as the good old United States or the Republic of Ireland, have fared just as well, if not better, without it. Ladies and gentlemen, the Commonwealth is not a force for good. It is an institution past its prime, existing more of a relic of an empire than a meaningful actor on the world stage. It does not rectify the inequalities of the past, it lacks the power to enforce its principles, and it provides little economic or political benefit to its members. If we are serious about promoting global cooperation, diplomacy, and equality, we must look beyond the Commonwealth to institutions that actually have the ability to make the difference. The Commonwealth is rooted in the British Empire, a system that subjugated and exploited millions across the globe. While the empire may have gone, the structural inequalities it created may remain embedded in many Commonwealth nations. The economic disparities between member states are stark. Wealthy nations such as the UK, Canada, and Australia continue to benefit disproportionately from trade agreements and influence, while smaller, less developed nations struggle to gain a fair foothold. The Commonwealth does not erase these historical injustices, it just reinforces them. And with that, I urge you to reject the notion. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank Professor Scotto for that fabulous address, and now cross over and give the floor to Kiwi Manivannan.
What does it mean to be a force for good? How do you adjudicate goodness? I speak as a Commonwealth citizen. I speak as a member of the most populous Commonwealth nation and one of its highest financial contributors to support the Commonwealth's present status as a force for good. Though through statistics and solid quantitative metrics, alongside softer, more caring and more realistic forms of evaluating impact, I hope to present this argument and refute the ones of my wonderful opposition. To start with, it feels like any conversation regarding the Commonwealth seems to root the UK and its supposed control over the Commonwealth as its primary source of evil, this post-colonial nostalgia, as my opposition put it forward. And it's that alongside an insistence on the human rights abuses and the troubles of the Third World. To start with, let me move the UK out of the picture. No one really cares about the UK's irrelevant aid politics, besides its ability to seek and provide restitutions for crimes past beyond the simple act of acknowledging the crimes of the empire. The truth is, as my wonderful first proposition speaker indicated, Commonwealth nations are up to 50% more likely to trade with one another, and I don't focus here on Britain. I don't focus here on the first world nations. I am insisting upon South-South trade and relations, for which the number is as high as 75% more likely to trade. Most arguments against the Commonwealth, as I mentioned, remain focused around the exploitation, the continuing human rights abuses, and more in third world countries. So surely then the question of the Commonwealth being a force for good is one that must be answered by third world members, rather than the UK and the first world prescribing merit and exploitation, ascribing victimhood for states that are no longer its own to speak for. So the question of human rights priorities not being upheld in certain Commonwealth nations, the Harare Declaration's tenets being ignored and not enforced, but yet the considerations of good that separate the text of the law from the practice of the law still exist, that separate education and cultural exchange from economic upliftment. Perhaps that perspective comes from the same Eurocentrism with which we now debate this question. Will the human rights issues magically cease to exist if the Commonwealth were to cease to exist? And yes, my opposition might make the argument that the question isn't about whether or not the Commonwealth must exist, but rather that if it's a force for good. But to prove that point, I only need one single instance of good. Can the opposition offer a single circumstance in recent history with the new Commonwealth that arose after India achieved republic status in 1949? Can they make a definitive claim that the Commonwealth has directly resulted in certain human rights abuses? That these colonial vestiges of trade or other points that have been made are solely a product of the Commonwealth, as opposed to one that the Commonwealth has failed to address? If the Commonwealth had went ahead and published the Eminent Persons Group report, speaking of its inability to address human rights issues in certain Commonwealth countries, it would have only meant a greater possibility of more members opting out of the Commonwealth, and less cultural and economic capital with which to sustain environments of care, community, and human rights. The Commonwealth continues to benefit its members in ways that perhaps escape the metric of mere statistics alone. It allows for emergency travel passports for Commonwealth citizens in other countries. It allows for increased cultural collaborations, funding in educational spaces, as my first proposition speaker mentioned, through and funding that ranks up to £80 million per year, entirely funded by the UK under the Commonwealth Development Scheme, £12 million given to Nigeria in 2017 to crack down on human trafficking, $3 million to Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan to end child labor, $2 million to support law enforcement, $10 million to help women at risk in South Asia, $13 million for victims of forced domestic work in 2017. And I could go on. And for my wonderful first opposition speaker, who spoke of token gestures and empty platitudes that the Commonwealth is written on, I offer these statistics, that money holds power, and if you were to be measuring goodness anymore, that money continues to be a force for good. In that regard, I also believe that, going on from my first proposition speaker, that education continues to remain important, not only in those strategic areas of security, trade, and geopolitics that my first opposition speaker mentioned, but simply on an individual level. The power of education and funding and its capacity for global transformation. My first proposition speaker mentioned that many people who have been empowered by Commonwealth schemes have continued to become global leaders, and I will name them. In Kenya alone, Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohammed, as well as Hassan Barrio, Lady Justices Njoki Ndugu and Agnes Mortor, Betty Maina, John Nekuru Okot, Joe Ageo, Michael Momo, and even the President of Costa Rica are leaders whose education was funded by schemes through the Commonwealth. From the creation of Ugandan farming communities to women's mobilization in conflict situations in Latin America, funding and support from the Commonwealth has been a balm to the world. In each of the circumstances, it's not only in the process of direct aid, but an ethos of responsibility and collective problem solving that the Commonwealth encourages. It's a fundamental space of British restitution for its crimes past, and in some ways one of the only remaining forms left. Well, to ask then if the Commonwealth of Nations is a force for good is a moot point. The equivalent metaphor of a patriarchal family structure with unfair benefits and unruly siblings, with our Lord Daddy King Charles sitting firm and ruling over us, with its post-colonial ghosts in the closet, with the sneaky tendrils of the empire perpetually reaching to envelope us.
but it's a family and a community still. It remains a space of collaboration, and the adverse influences of the UK, Canada, and other supposedly first world countries, which considering last year's eggplant shortage, I'm kind of inclined to not agree with. Much like the opposition agrees that the Commonwealth's importance is diminishing, so is the importance of these supposed first world countries that supposedly dominated. And I think at the end of the day, I return to that question of goodness. What is the nature of the term good? Is goodness measured in numbers and statistics and finance, in reports authored from an analytical distance and promises of trade? No. Goodness is known through the ability of a life to thrive, to flourish beyond just survival, to find possibilities for movement, for individuals and countries alike, to find the betterment. Goodness to me is also the reassuring knowledge of a rapidly declining monarchy, destined to soon perish, and a growth in international Commonwealth support systems that helps people, funds its students, creates farming communities despite its colonial hauntings. And per the British Social Attitude Survey, compared to 1983 when 83% of people in Britain supported the monarchy, that number is now just 54%. And should it collapse sooner than we think, won't the Commonwealth find room then for more democratic equality? And goodness is access, representation. Loved ones who've made it to this country, who can vote in the UK's elections as Commonwealth citizens, who can stand for MSP and MP, find some minor restitution for decades of enslavement, for the £1.2 billion of the UK's £2.3 billion that online sources say was quote-unquote procured from India. But moving on, perhaps I now need to focus on a different word in the topic statement of the Commonwealth, that the Commonwealth is a force for good. The word is. Not was, not used to be, is. Even if you focus on the UK, on whether the Commonwealth has substantive meaning for the people of Britain, there yet remain positive indicators. Trade with the Commonwealth constitutes 10% of the UK's total trade, and yes, this holds the capacity to recreate financial systems of control and exploitation, but so does the global capitalist market anyway. If there's anything we know, in a society driven by the individualism and the selfishness of capital greed, exploitation comes free and easy. It's community and goodness that needs to be forced and repeatedly insisted upon. It's in this insistence that the Commonwealth finds its force for good. But ultimately, if we were to go with the opposition's arguments, and like my perfectly toned abs, the Commonwealth is to be ripped, shredded, sculpted into a new space, could the Commonwealth of Nations transform? Be new and do better? In the words of a certain ravishing black drone-deploying baby girl Barack Obama, or skillfully rotund man Robert the bodybuilder. Builder man? Bob the Builder. Yes, we can. But any harms that exist in the Commonwealth will exist even without it, if at all at a greater extent. And thus, considering the agrarian communities created, the education, the cultural growth, the trade possibilities, the disaster relief efforts, the forums for diplomatic exchange, the combating of child labor, gender-based violence, each of which should be good enough to win this motion individually, I conclude that the Commonwealth is indeed, right now, in its present manner, a force for good.
For that fine address, and now across the floor and give the floor to Arielle Friedlander. Here, here.
Kia ora. In case you missed a Kiwi accent, you've got another one. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm here to argue is not the potential of the Commonwealth, or even what it could be, or the good intentions of the Commonwealth. What I'm here to argue is that I doubt the delivery and the enforcement of the Commonwealth. And for this, I argue that the Commonwealth is not a force for good, because at this current point in time, it is not a force. Unfortunately, the Commonwealth has become redundant. Due to the current world we live in, it is failing to meet the needs that it's trying to achieve. I'm going to stay away from history and respect the first speaker by focusing on 2025 and practical skills. We talk about, the third world nations and how we have to slowly integrate human rights changes and that we cannot expect all to contribute. But I think this is somewhat hypocritical considering 90% of the Commonwealth lives in countries in which it is dangerous to be an LGBT member. And based on that, should we not focus on trying to represent and make those changes for that 90% more than we currently are, especially considering we have shown in the past a willingness to kick out member states, including Zimbabwe in 2003. So I ask, why are we not trying to enforce pressure on countries like Nigeria, Sudan? There's plenty we could discuss. And on that note, I would like to point out that Is there a reason we're not kicking them out? Is it because we don't have the influence we used to, and that by removing them from our sphere of influence, we're not making that much of a difference? Why has discussing LGBT rights been put to the bottom of the list, if not kicked out, from the past 2 to 3 Chogam meetings? I believe that the Commonwealth is trying to fight the fact that we are in a very aggressive world with plenty of soft and hard powers around us, that we're trying to hold on to our vastness rather than trying to actually enforce something. And for that, ladies and gentlemen, I do not believe the Commonwealth is a force for good, because a force would be capable of making these changes and enforcing real-life consequences. While what the second proposition speaker did say is extremely positive, these are minor. So much of the South Pacific and Africa is receiving much more substantial investment in its infrastructure and health policies from countries like China than it is from the Commonwealth. We're seeing a pull away from the Commonwealth sphere of influence because what are we really supporting? I doubt that the Commonwealth, because we're beginning to move away from our colonial history, which I'm not really intending to get into, as I think the Commonwealth is a great idea for countries who've experienced colonialism under the British Empire to engage in a shared history and work together from this. We don't really know what we're trying to do, and how can we be a force if we're not really sure what exactly we're standing for, if we don't know how we're going to enforce it. And moving on from this, I do think it's important to comment that a lot of the achievements achieved by Commonwealth nations have been done independently of the Commonwealth itself. While 15 of the states of the 56 mentioned are Commonwealth nations, their relationships, particularly in Indigenous areas, have been done between their own government and the Indigenous people involved, or between collaboration of the Indigenous groups independently of the Commonwealth. In many ways, one could feel, as some academics do, that the Commonwealth is a lovely place of platitudes and idealisms, but no solid concrete enforcement. My background is I'm part today a Māori, and due to that, I have some interest in Māori theology. And a huge amount of our work on working on a Māori identity and building relationships with other Indigenous groups in Australia and Canada have been done completely independently of the Commonwealth system as it stands. Some feel it's actually an inhibitor due to the fact that many Indigenous groups feel uncomfortable engaging in a Commonwealth that seems to be better at attending meetings and apologising than offering practical solutions forward. Also, on the note of the Commonwealth and its Indigenous history, I would wonder, going back to the pressure that we failed to see on LGBT issues, why did it only take to the 90s to get a proper Indigenous referendum put through the Commonwealth? And why was that raised by Fiji of all states? And why was the big countries, and that have these histories like Canada, New Zealand and Australia, so reluctant to get involved? And we talk about the Commonwealth helping to resolve polarisation. It's hard to resolve polarisation if you're not really relevant in the politics you're being argued for in the first place. But in parts of Australia, especially sort of the voice referendum, the Commonwealth became used as a callback to empire and some forms of white nationalism, rather than as a peacekeeping force. Again, I do not doubt the good intentions of the Commonwealth. I am an idealist. As many of you have heard me say, I believe that we have a great responsibility to work together, especially considering so many of our nations have given our blood to European battlefields, our labour to European markets, and have sacrificed endlessly. But I do not believe, at this point in time, we are a force. And let alone, if we cannot be a force, how can we be a force for good? Because is our redundancy not eventually sliding into the negative? So ladies and gentlemen, if you do believe that the Commonwealth has this potentiality, like I do, then I encourage you to vote against the notion because it has not met it yet. And we cannot continue to see our, while impressive, but on a global scale, small achievements as saying we've done enough. If we are now a Commonwealth that does not rely on Britain as much and are trying to support each other, where is the enforcement of that? Where are the practical skills to show that? Why is my home country's military mainly subsidised by America? Why are most of the economic and military support for South Pacific Islands, especially as they're trying to both get economically viable in the world and prepare for climate change, coming from China? Why are we not seeing more dialogue from our countries that are so-called more westernised, but I believe a Human Declaration is less a Western project, more a global project, enforcing it? And we do have countries that are becoming a fantastic economic powerhouses like India, but India still has continual issues, including when it comes to femicide and sexual assault. And who's going to be enforcing it? Now, I'm not saying my country is a dreamboat. We're definitely not. We have plenty of issues. Just ask the New Zealand ACT Party. And if you'd like to expand on that, we have our own issues of domestic violence. But because I don't see any way in which our current system is able to make enforceable changes, and I can see a sizable proportion, 90% of the Commonwealth suffering below human standards, I cannot, in good conscience, walk away and say we are a force for good until those numbers significantly change. Good is not just an ideal, good is an action. And as a proud New Zealander and proud Commonwealth citizen, I believe that part of that is actually seeing if we are capable of change, or following what Indigenous communities have done and foster our own relationships with each other independently. I do believe it's important to say, without going to colonial nostalgia, we've had this entire idea of, post-Brexit, don't worry about Europe, we'll join the family of nations. Yeah, well, if you keep neglecting that family of nations for a couple of decades and changing the goalposts, that family of nations is going to be really confused when you can't decide what benefits you're going to give us. And the fact that some of us, like New Zealand and Australia, have better trade relations with the EU than the UK, and that we have better trade relations with America or ourselves than we do as a whole. So really what I want to see, to call the Commonwealth a force for good, is I want to see much better integration of rights. I want to see much better enforcement. I want to see better trade and better cultural engagement, because on the note of cultural engagement, we have a brilliant opportunity to bond over what it was like to be the Anglosphere and to be both, to be penalised by that. And yet, it feels that these opportunities are being wasted away by very good intention. I will never deny the good intention, very well educated members who sadly, for the competitive world we live in, are not achieving enough. And I think we need to bite off more and figure out what we can actually chew before we can call ourselves a force. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arielle. So now is the time of the evening where we open up the debate to the floor, which means that anybody in attendance can stand if they're able and give a speech of up to 2 minutes. We do have a floor speech prize this week. I think it's a £15 voucher for Spoiled Life. We do excellent coffee and tea and sweet treats and all that kind of stuff, so it's all very good. It's the right way up, that's perfect. So without any further ado, any speeches from the floor this evening? Pa's hand went straight up. Yeah, go on, Pa.
Okay. So I actually just have a question for both sides to address, and then a small defence of proposition, just to reorient opposition slightly more to the debate, so I can, because I'm currently unconvinced. So, question for both sides is: would these benefits and harms exist with or without the Commonwealth? I think there needs to be more discussion at the table on what would happen if we didn't have it and what is actually happening with it. So, for example, trade. Would these partners trade together just because they have similar resources, because they have similar cultural ties, because they're regionally proximate? And really, what is this Commonwealth advantage boiling down to? How much is it based on sentiment and nostalgia? Second of all, the educational improvements that the proposition has been talking about, would these still exist as well? But then also for opposition, human rights abuses arguably could happen on both sides of the debate, regardless of if the Commonwealth exists or not, because of lots of structural factors which arguably has been done through colonialism, but colonialism has happened, and that is a bad thing. So I think there needs to be more engagement here. Then second of all, I just want to make one brief observation. We are obviously debating the Commonwealth because it's quite a small, relative to other regional blocs, it's quite a small in a nation. But opposition's trying to make it seem like it's small and not useful, but then wanting to wish it was big and do all of these things that it's actually wanting to do. So you cannot complain it's too small and then complain it's not doing big things. So when they explain, all the action that they want it to take, who is actually a global policeman anyway in this world? No one. Who actually wants to violate the sovereignty of a country? No one. And often they only do it when they only do it because of some powers who think it's in their best interest, but lots of people don't necessarily agree on violating people's sovereignty in the first place. Does the EU, ASEAN, Mercosur enforce anything? For example, does ASEAN, do anything about Myanmar violations? Does Mercosur do anything about political corruption in Latin America? Does the EU care about the fact that Poland's passed anti-LGBT laws? Not really, and doesn't really affect all of those things. But smallness can be a good thing, because, as the propositions highlighted, there's loads of no-strings-attached things, and China, even though it gives loads of money, does really bad things like debt trap diplomacy and BRI. So I think we need to explain what the unique things about the Commonwealth are and debate on those rather than just stuff it could do, which it just can't.
Thank you very much, Path. Other speeches from the floor? It's worth noting that the board of 10 can't actually win the prize, so it's very much still up to grabs after they've all spoken. Mia?
Thank you everyone for the debate so far. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask opposition, as I think there's a little bit of a sort of inconsistency in the way that they've approached the case. So opposition say that they are upset that the Commonwealth does not step in when issues arise within the member states, but equally criticises the Commonwealth for being a colonial institution which has, in the past, used its power to enforce its own ideas or to act in ways within these countries, which that country has not consented to. I would argue that the very definition of a colonial infringement is to do something which that country has not accepted or does not want to happen to it. Also, I'd like to point out that when and if these colonial countries were in receipt of some sort of pushback from the Commonwealth, this would likely just make the situation in that country a whole lot worse. This is the reason why the international community has just in general moved away from concerted efforts to impose ideas upon a particular country. So when Arielle talks about kicking out members for ignoring things like gay rights or the human rights abuses, she ignores the fact that what this would actually do is further isolate these regions and further isolate these countries, making them much more likely to sort of pally to the nationalistic sentiments within these countries' politics that actually make these abuses of human rights and the abuse of gay people much more prominent within these areas. So I agree with Parth when they say that the opposition bench is kind of confused about what they want the Commonwealth to be and what they think actually looks like for it to be a force for good. I'd also like to note just quickly for the whole debate, just because the Commonwealth is a force for good does not require nobody else to be an effective international actor in the area. But as to say, it actually doesn't matter if there are lots of other institutions which are also doing good things. The Commonwealth can also just be adding something particularly beneficial. Again, in defence of the proposition here, I think the way that the Commonwealth is organised and structured is just fundamentally beneficial insofar as it draws attention and it gets education to these people of these countries. I think this being a benefit which is left standing in the debate is just sufficient for them to win at this point, unless opposition can reckon with the inconsistencies I pointed out. Thank you.
Thank you to Mia. Other speeches from the floor? Yes, please stand and say your name.
I might as well. I'm a joint citizen of both the UK and Canada. And so I suppose as a citizen of the United Kingdom, it's possible that the Commonwealth has actually not been so much of a force for good because many people are distracted by it. I believe firmly that our future is in the heart of Europe, not having some sort of rose-tinted view of our colonial past, and so it's possible that people were inspired by that when they voted to leave the European Union. And given that was by such a small margin, it's entirely possible that the Commonwealth contributed to that. So as a UK citizen, maybe I'm not so keen. Certainly, however, on the other side, I wouldn't have my Canadian citizenship if it weren't for the Commonwealth, because my grandmother wouldn't have moved when she was in her 20s to Canada. If it weren't a member of the Commonwealth, she was much more keen on moving to a Commonwealth country than any other, because she knew at least that there would be some sort of familiarity when she was moving abroad. And so I am incredibly pleased that I'm also a Canadian citizen, not least because it means it's easier for me to actually go and work in Europe as a Canadian citizen rather than as a British citizen. I can go for 12 months instead of getting a 90-day visa. So I suppose I don't have much of a point other than I'm conflicted. On the one hand, I think that the UK shouldn't be distracted by its colonial past, or shouldn't want to hark back to that, and should focus on our future in Europe. On the other hand, I think it's fantastic that we have these connections with countries such as Canada, not just on a personal level, but it's because so many people can go and live in these countries that they know that we have a closer relationship with, and I think that is definitely a positive thing. Thank you.
Okay, let's do Jamie and then Alex.
So my name's Jamie, and I, like my colleague here, also hold dual citizenship with a Commonwealth state. And so to some extent my debate here, or my floor speech here, is going to be a little bit biased towards the UK and Australia, that is. However, I think it is very important that we leave countries like Australia and New Zealand and Canada, for that matter, not out of this debate, but out of the light in which this debate, but out of the underlying motive of this debate, because Australia, Canada and New Zealand are unlike many of the other Commonwealth states. We are states that are very independent from other countries. We do trade predominantly with the United States, with China and so on and so forth, and we have very, very close ties with Europe and the United Kingdom and many other nations in the West. As the second proposition speaker, however, stated, Q, they said that we should be talking about other nations, also in the Commonwealth. There are many islands in the Pacific that are members of the Commonwealth, and there are many other countries that are and that have suffered from a colonialist state. But very much so, the notion is in the present, it's not in the past. For that reason, colonialism should stay as far away from this debate as possible. However, I would like to read out the reason why the Commonwealth exists. It's that it was created to maintain ties between the former British colonies that had gained independence and were now considered equal partners. That notion of equality is fundamental in the Charter of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is an association of independent countries that work together to promote shared values. Now, we shouldn't be looking at this in a consequentialist way. We shouldn't be drawing on ties with the European Union, because the European Union is a fundamentally different organisation. It stands for fundamentally different things. The notion of the euro as a shared currency, for example, that wouldn't work in the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is a completely different organisation and exists purely to maintain relationships between countries. The world is a more divided place than ever now, and I would hate to vote for the side of the House that wants to encourage that division rather than subside it.
Okay, thank you to Jamie. Alex?
Yeah. Well, I have no dog in this race, given that I hold no citizenship from any country of the Commonwealth. So let's try to take it from a slightly different perspective. Now, everyone here is very keen to debate this topic from 2025. Great, what's happening today? And whereas that's important, 2025 didn't just appear on its own. There is a history behind it. There is a context. And how on earth did we get to 2025? Well, the Commonwealth, if we're being honest here, and if we're being actually historically accurate, was created after the Second World War in its current form to maintain the international system that was the British Empire. Now, and actually, historians like John Darwin went as far as to call it the Fourth British Empire at the time, which of course collapsed when the UK entered the European Union, back then the EEC, because that sort of epitomized the collapse of said world system. The UK in the sterling zone, there you go, Jamie, currently does matter in the Commonwealth, because it literally represents a time where it was a more coherent economic and trading bloc, though not a very equal one. And if we go today, okay, that's the history, it's a bleak one, but let's take it today. And if we take it as a block of cooperation, multilateralism is good, but what boxes does it actually tick? Well, not a heck of a lot. As we said, economy, not very much. There's no coherence. The only coherence that the Commonwealth has in economy is global North countries within it consistently offering very disadvantageous trading terms to global South countries and blocking their imports, especially agricultural ones. Freedom of movement. That's a joke. There's no freedom of movement in the Commonwealth. And in fact, the UK continually applies very problematic deportation policies towards citizens of other Commonwealth countries. Plain and simple, multilateralism is great, but the Commonwealth is not doing a great job at it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Yes, just at the back.
Just a short question from me. I'd be quite interested to hear a little bit more about where each side thinks the centre of influence exists for current Commonwealth member states. Whether it's amongst other Commonwealth members, whether it's China, whether it's the US, Britain, wherever. I'd just be curious to know where that centre of influence lies. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes, just here, please stand stay in for the minutes.
Minutes, it's Callisto, and I think it should just be pointed out the slight incongruousness of this debate in that it's happening in, I would say arguably, the centre of influence of the Commonwealth, in a predominantly white institution, and half of the floor speeches you've heard have been, oh, I love the Commonwealth, it meant my grandparents could move abroad and become a writer. And I feel surely we should be asking perhaps the people who live in some of these global south countries how they feel about the Commonwealth, not necessarily how the heads of state feel about the Commonwealth, who are already in an advantageous position, but does the Commonwealth provide an active benefit to someone who lives in a small island nation? Do they see those benefits, or do they feel that it's just empty platitudes? I feel like this debate can't really continue to function if we can't hear from some of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other speeches from the floor this evening? We still have a few minutes. None? Okay, wonderful. In which case, we will announce the winner of the floor speech prize at the end of the evening. We now return to the table and we go in reverse order, so we will be starting with Arielle in 5 minutes.
Jesus, you're a tough crowd. But no, I would like to go back to your comments actually, particularly Parth and Mia, because I do feel that was a somewhat unjust portrayal of my side's arguments. I'm not arguing against the Commonwealth being small and that being a negative thing. Far from it. May I like a small effective government and so forth and so on. But rather, the issue is not the size of the Commonwealth. The issue is that the Commonwealth as it stands is ineffective at delivering what it needs to for the demand. It is not delivering the social changes, the economic changes, and the development policies that it should be for these people. Now, to Mia's point about, am I opposing other countries being involved in order to be a force of good? Absolutely not. I'm free trade, you can have whoever you want involved. The issue is, how are we as a Commonwealth meant to maintain each other, keep a stake in the game, be more than just a members club? What do we have to offer? And if another country is meeting the demands better, what do we have to stand on except for our moral and cultural value? A moral and cultural value that I don't think we're delivering on at this point. Now, I do believe that the Commonwealth needs to be a place for countries that have survived colonial history and have colonial experiences under the British Empire to work together. Now, to the floor speech at the back about enforcement, and is that trying to look for a form of neo-imperialism? Not at all. Enforcement is not the case of someone coming around and whacking people on the hand. It's a case of saying, you've agreed to these principles that we've all agreed to. What is it that's going to keep us all in it? There has to be consequences and rewards. Part of the issue here is not just because there aren't consequences coming in, they're not rewards for countries making these changes. Countries that are bringing in new forms of LGBT policy or opening up to more cultural discussions, etc., are not being properly compensated and encouraged in that direction. And that is not the responsibility of the UK, although the UK, as Alex pointed out, has a strong historical role. That is the responsibility of all of us in the Commonwealth who, as a voluntary organisation, signed these agreements. You know, when it comes to world agreements and world policy, I think in general, we actually all need to start being accountable for what we sign. Now, on that note on where to stand between countries, I think it's a pretty easy game here, because none of us on this side are arguing that the Commonwealth is an impossibility, is a negative force. We're just arguing that it is not meeting the demands it needs to. And if we want to see positive collaboration in the wake of colonialism into something better, it needs to actually start being competitive and rewarding. And if you cannot be economically or politically the strongest guy on the block, then be the moral guy, be the cultural guy, be the person actually making that change. I can see Alex not impressed with that final comment. You have an expressive face, my dear. But I still stand by that, because if we're going to have parts of the UK that romanticise the Commonwealth, then we need to reconsider what this even is. You know, it's not the issue that the Commonwealth needs to be reliant only on itself. I'm very anti that. The Commonwealth being more connected and more responsible and more helpful will prevent the isolation it stands for. How am I doing?
It's 1 minute now.
Oh, excellent. I'm not done yet. Great. And you know, I do think it's important to say that if 90% of the Commonwealth's people are living under unjust, unhumane circumstances and they've all signed a deal to change that, we need to start measuring that change. And I'm a big fan of what has been discussed on proposition tonight and bringing forward that. But what we're talking about in this moment is it a force for good? Not yet. And therefore, if you have good faith in the development of the Commonwealth and it changing from a colonial relic into something beneficial, then I encourage you to agree with the side of the House and vote opposition, so we can actually see where it's going to go, because it cannot be a force for good if it's not capable of being a force in the game. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Arielle for all your contributions to the debate this evening. Now, for the final time, I would like to invite Professor Scotto back to continue the debate here.
In that order. Thanks. Okay, so I thought there was a really good question from the audience in terms of where is the Commonwealth centered? Well, the reality is it's not particularly centered anywhere, since it's not much of a relevant organization. Member states actually center their interests and their sphere of influence in depending, on where they are in the globe and who their substantive partners are. The Commonwealth's real existence is just rooted in the British Empire. It's a relic of colonialism, as we said. It's not really a forward-looking organization. We heard some comments about the British Social Attitude Survey, but then again about the decline of the monarchy, and maybe that would be a really good thing for the Commonwealth, but that's a really interesting thing, because the British monarchy remains central to the symbolism of the Commonwealth, which is, which my good friends will admit is basically an outdated and increasingly a controversial aspect of the of member states. Probably many member states, I think, will also maintain their membership out of inertia rather than active engagement. Many countries, such as even Australia, has questioned their participation. I would say that there were some also really good questions from the audience suggesting that well, are these benefits that we're seeing tonight or that we've heard tonight really basically benefits that would accrue to countries even if they didn't have this organization wrapped around them, this weak organization, right? In basic research design, the Commonwealth is a spurious variable. Okay, it's simply its declining relevance, right? If you look at other multinational organizations, there's ASEAN, there's the African Union, there's all sorts of other organizations that do many more substantive things, such as peacekeeping, such as the African Free Trade Zone, often deeply under acknowledged as a key achievement, all without the Commonwealth. Okay, the UK basically doesn't even really have that much of a commitment to the bloc, only when it helps them. I should, if we want to go back in history, one of my favorite articles is by my good friend Mike Munger. Basically, New Zealand, our friends, we've had our colleagues here from New Zealand, they suffered 10 years of economic hardship when the United Kingdom abandoned free trade with New Zealand in 1973 and basically went into the European Economic Community. Is that really, that basically shows you how, what will happen, right? That basically, when it suits countries to just abandon their Commonwealth friends, they will. Further, membership does not, as we've heard tonight, membership does not confer clear trade, travel, or legal benefits, unlike the European Union, which has freedom of movement and a customs union, right? Many former British colonies are not in the Commonwealth, such as the United States and Ireland, and they fare just as well, if not better, economically and politically. And that, I would reinforce, is why it's just simply a lot of the benefits we've heard from the Commonwealth really is just a spurious thing. Commonwealth nations do not also, don't give each other, and we've heard this, special visa privileges. Commonwealth citizens particularly face heavy immigration barriers and even deportation in the case of Windrush in countries like the UK and Australia. Then the funny thing is we heard the Commonwealth Games. Oh, I love that. That was my favorite part of time. It's one of the organization's most public events. It's largely irrelevant on the global sports stage. I was looking at this. Top athletes have withdrawn because they're too busy with real competitions, such as the Olympics or the World Championships or other useful international competitions. Indeed, several host countries just said, why do we want to do this? South Africa and our beloved Canada have basically said, well, we don't want to host this. This just costs too much money and nobody cares. So this basically demonstrates its declining significance. If your main symbolic athletics game nobody cares about. So all of this is to basically say that that there's very, very little substantive that couldn't be accomplished by these countries outside of the Commonwealth. There's no real understanding of what these nations need. I think, though, I want to close. How much time do I have?
20 seconds.
How much?
20 seconds.
Values. Weakness of Commonwealth values. They claim to promote everything, but we realize that there's so much democratic backsliding in these countries, and then the Commonwealth has been completely ineffectual in policing this or actually trying to take a key stance to mitigate against this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Scotto, though I do wish you would have told us how you really feel about the Commonwealth Games. Okay, wonderful. Now I'd like to invite Hugh back to continue the debate. Here.
Hi again, it's me. I'm the Global South. I think to start with, the opposition's case rests on a very shaky definition of the word force and an even shakier definition of the word platitudes. We've established on the proposition side of things with firm numbers and statistics and money provided of the fact that there have been firm good done to countries in the Third World and the Global South, which are far beyond the question of platitudes. The second opposition speaker pretty much admitted in their closing speech that it's not up for debate whether the Commonwealth is good. It's a question of the fact that they could be better, the fact that they aren't a force yet, and that they could be one. That being said, so I do believe that the Commonwealth continues to remain a flawed system of doing good, but nonetheless a system that does good and a force for good. And in terms of the kinds of questions that we received, whether or not these benefits or harms would exist without the Commonwealth, for instance, which Bart brought up, there are a number of these things, including, for instance, Britain's funding of education, which on an essential scale would not exist without at least the system of coordination that the Commonwealth countries established in the first place. The fact that I get to perhaps be Prime Minister one day would not exist if not for the Commonwealth. When it comes to the questions of gay rights and when it comes to the LGBTQ rights, as a proud LGBTQ myself, I would say that in the questions of femicide, in the questions in India, the questions of human rights abuses of many other kinds in Commonwealth countries, which the Commonwealth of Nations has been unable to regulate, I can tell you with very firm hand that these issues will continue to exist with or without the Commonwealth's existence. That femicide isn't going anywhere, even if the UN intervenes directly, even if the US were to invade India, that's going to continue. That's going to go on a while, man. I don't know what else to say. But with respect to the center of the Commonwealth, I disagree that there isn't a center. I disagree that it's irrelevant. I agree that the center of the Commonwealth is the UK. I agree that the Commonwealth has its colonial vestiges. I do believe it's a colonial structure. But I would take any and all forms of colonial money I get in the third world, so I could do better. If it weren't for that case, I wouldn't be studying at St. Andrews. I wouldn't be benefiting of UKRI funding, which also comes through Commonwealth privileges. The question of equality in the Charter and of the lack of movement, the inability of the other privileges that, say, the EU holds. Countries in the Global South, it's a long way ahead of us, if ever possible, that we will ever be a part of a system which allows for free movement between countries without visa privileges. It's very unlikely that we would be in the circumstance that we would have benefits that equate to the EU or Europe at any circumstance. And that being said, it leads directly to the point of consequences and rewards, which Arielle brought up. Even the UN has failed to understand what could possibly be considered a reward that wouldn't be instantly also off-putting and disincentivizing for other countries that do not, say, have LGBTQ rights at the same level as other countries. Simply put, the fact that India still does not have marriage equality for LGBTQ individuals does not necessarily mean there isn't an extreme amount of good that can be done in terms of child labor reform, in terms of women's inclusion, which the Commonwealth directly at least empowers, without messing with the very fragile egotisms of the global leaders that are present at that forum. As all diplomacy goes, the Commonwealth is a fragile space. And within that fragile space, it is up to the Secretariat to do what they can to retain the members that they have, not have them leave the Commonwealth, even including cases such as Nigeria's sovereignty, where the question came up, and be in a circumstance where they can continue to extend as much as soft power, as much cultural exchange, as much as education as they can, to continue to be a force for good. Goodness is not perfect. Goodness is not whole. Goodness is not something that comes from knowing that you are a force that is ever present and perfect. I think if we were to go with the opposition's definition of what a force for good would be, there exists no force for good in the world as stands. I would say
40 seconds.
Well, I would say that, to continue, there's a couple of things that I missed out. And I think we mentioned the idea of the Commonwealth being more competitive, and there were other questions about the post-Brexit family of nations, the romanticism of the UK holding on to the Commonwealth as a mode of benefit for it. There's an excellent series of books by a scholar called Philip Murphy, who has addressed this point directly in the sense of, no, the UK's reliance on the Commonwealth is a joke. Which is why I began my speech by saying, let's put the UK aside. I don't give a damn. All that matters at this moment is the countries that the UK owes restitution to. And whatever religion that it's present in, I'll take it. Thanks.
Thank you very much to Q for that fine speech, and I would now like to invite Professor Hook back to conclude the debate.
Thank you. J.D. Vance and the Americans have had to put up with being lectured to by Greta Thunberg, or Europeans are now having to be put up with being lectured to by Elon Musk, which means you now have to put up with another 5 minutes of being lectured to by a Kiwi. The Commonwealth, so misunderstood. A lot of the real work is being done informally, and that's the Commonwealth's greatest strength. But it's also one of its greatest weaknesses because no one sees it. And I think when we listen to this discussion today, we've heard about the Commonwealth as the UK's last grasp for relevance, it's the nostalgia of a fading colonial power. But I can tell you that having spent some time in different parts of the Commonwealth recently, people aren't talking about these things. They're talking about climate change and reparatory justice and legal and constitutional reform and decriminalisation and and media freedom. They're not talking about the Queen and the UK military and so on and so forth. People have this imagination of the Commonwealth as sort of somehow the royal family sitting around being fanned with banana leaves by all these countries around. It's just not the reality of what happens in these multilateral spaces. And in fact, the informality is astonishing. When I was out in Samoa just a few months ago, I was standing in a bar, chatting away to some bloke, and after about 10 minutes of talking about New Zealand and how he had studied there and we'd been here and there, I said to him, by the way, I said, who are you? And he said, oh, I'm the Prime Minister of Tonga. I said, oh, I'm Kingsley from New Zealand. I had very similar experiences at the Commonwealth Law Ministers meeting in Zanzibar. You would never have this happen to you in the European Union, or Brussels, or in the UN Security Council in New York. Forget about it. You'd be lucky to get 2 minutes with a low-level official. Another argument we've heard is, what is the relevance of the Commonwealth when countries like America have just done so well without it? You know, as it happens, I was reflecting on this very thing in the last couple of weeks. And I would argue that as of the 20th of February 2025, one of the Commonwealth's greatest strengths is that we do not have America in it, or China or Russia or many of these other authoritarian or wannabe authoritarian states. And I almost leapt up out of my desk and ran down to Marlborough House, the head of the Commonwealth Secretariat, and said, this is your moment. It wasn't Brexit. This is it. Fill these gaps and make the Commonwealth the centre of providing aid to these countries which are now struggling as trillions of dollars have been ripped out from under them. We've also heard that the Commonwealth is bad because of these legacies of colonisation and colonialism, and there's no argument in this room about the horrors that countries and people within those countries suffered throughout those decades, throughout those hundreds of years, and that it's a colonial institution. But you know what? Somebody said to me recently, an East African lawyer, she said to me, it is precisely because of this shared experience that the Commonwealth has value to us. Because we come together and we actually have this common history, and the repercussions are still present with all of us, and we can get together and talk about solutions, and we understand each other. And we saw that in Samoa when the CARICOM, the community of Caribbean states, came together and said, we want dialogue and reparatory justice. And this is a shared experience of not just the Caribbean countries within the Commonwealth. And we've seen it on other issues too. On LGBTI plus rights, has the Commonwealth done enough? Absolutely not. Has anyone done enough? No. And the Commonwealth needs to do better on this, and many other issues too. Media freedom, on the way in which people are persecuted for merely being homeless or vagrants, or being impoverished throughout the Commonwealth, and they are perniciously punished through the criminalisation of their lives through laws such as vagrancy laws and loitering laws and idleness laws. And particularly now that the Americans have pulled out with USAID in many of these spaces, the Commonwealth needs to do more, and needs to do more urgently. And it needs to do more in terms of monitoring, documentation and enforcement. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Last comment, and I want to end by referring to my friend in the House here, I think really tied up this conversation very nicely. I want to end by saying I also strongly believe that those wondering whether the Commonwealth is a force for good should not just be listening to us in these elite institutions like St Andrews or the University of London. Let's ask the Global South what they think. And I sat next to a Nigerian chap in Samoa who said to me, my president just wrote an op-ed, and in that op-ed, the president of Nigeria argued on the eve of CHOGM in Samoa that if an alliance of primarily English-speaking nations rooted in common law and shared commitment to global rules didn't exist, one would need to be created. If the Commonwealth did not exist, we would want to create it. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank Professor Abbott for that address. Please all join me in thanking all of our wonderful speakers this evening. Time to call the House to a vote. So all those in favour of the motion, i.e. you believe that the Commonwealth is a force for good and you side with our wonderful proposition speakers, please raise your hands now.
Have we surrendered?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Many firsts happen in this
Thank
house.
you very much. And all those against the motion, you side with the opposition?
My first debate in 26 years and I get shut out.
Wow, okay. And any abstentions?
Seven.
Liberals.
We've got it, we've softened it.
Come on, if you're going to do it, stick to it. Alex.
Oh no.
Okay, wonderful. So before we announce the winner of tonight's it's time for some announcements from board. If we can go to Alex Sherwood and Means first, please.
Right, I think we need to check the minutes if we ever had a debate where such a vote has happened. But anyway, I really hope that you enjoy this, enjoy your Commonwealth. We have a European Union. And big thanks to our four speakers. Some of them stepped in quite last minute. But yeah, thank you very much for what was a very a great debate. Now, as you might know this, we do these every week, and we will be back next week with a debate on the motion. This House believes that radical eco-action damages the image of the movement. So that's going to be, I think that not exactly the phrasing, but some.
It is.
Perfect. So that's going to be great fun, and please come along.
Thank you very much to Alex. Neva isn't here, so can we go to Competitive Secretary Jack, please?
Hello everyone. So if you would like to learn how to debate, like the people tonight or like some of our floor speakers, we host our competitive trainings every week at 2 p.m. on the top floor of the Union on Wednesdays. It's free to attend, it's open to beginners every week, so please do come along, that's really fun. And then the other thing I'd like to talk about this week is that we send people to competitions around the UK and around Europe all the time. But this weekend we have our internal competition. So if you haven't done any debate competitions before, or you're new and you want to try it out, on Sunday we have a debate competition. It's fairly short, running from 12 till 6. We go out to dinner after. We're still looking for one more speaker. So if there's anyone here who isn't signed up and who's interested, please come up to talk to me after the debate, because we'd love to have you.
Okay, wonderful. And then lastly, Arielle.
Hi, it's me again. So, when I'm not debating the Commonwealth, I'm also the social sec, or steward. And part of that means doing our social after this event, which is going to Beacon Bar in the Union and having a well-deserved drink, I think. If you'd like to hear more of my lovely Kiwi accent or know why I did what I did, follow along. And can't wait to see you all there. Thank you.
Nothing for me this week except to say thank you very much for coming, and do join us next week for Radical Eco Action. That's going to be, I think, a pretty controversial debate, so do join us. So without further ado, I've never seen this, genuinely. We'll have to ask William, who's our, I think, oldest member of our committee, but this is a pretty momentous evening for some. On the motion, this House believes that the Commonwealth is a force for good. The ayes to the right, 29, the nays to the left, 0, with 6 abstentions. So the ayes have it. Congratulations. Thank you all very much for joining us. Congratulations to the proposition, and we'll see you at Beacon Bar.